Welcome to Ask Us Marketing. I'm your host, Callie Fedosinko of Callie Collective, a digital marketing agency designed to build relationships between financial advisors and their target audience through data-driven content, websites, and advertising. Our episode today is brought to you by the Financial Planning Association, otherwise known as the FPA. The FPA is a great resource center providing education, support, and networking opportunities for financial advisors like you. So, welcome with me today, Sarah from CopyHop, where she takes your podcast and helps you create several pieces of content from just one episode.
Hi,
Welcome,
Kelly. Thanks
Sarah.
so much for
How are
having me
you?
on. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. A little stuffy, but doing good. uh, so, Sarah, like I just said in the intro there, podcasts are trending for financial advisors, and you help podcasters repurpose their content. Can you explain what that means?
Of course. So, content repurposing isn't just for podcasts and podcasters. It's actually for anybody who makes any kind of content, which could be
Mm,
videos, blog posts, mail stations. So, reading that content that you made and adapting it so that you can share it again. And it might not necessarily be content that you made yourself. It might be that you have been say on a podcast and that original content and turning it into something new. So for example, it might be taking a podcast episode and breaking it down into a series of posts.
mm. Besides saving time, obviously, and coming up with new ideas, are there any benefits to repurposing content?
Yeah, so content repurposing saves you the time and effort of having to think of original ideas every single time you want to post.
Mhm.
So it makes it much easier for you to fill up your content calendar because you can take one idea and stretch it out, maybe even across a whole month to get a month's worth of posts from one idea. And because you can create more content, there's a potential for you to have better reach in for your audience because you've got more posts and you can be present on more platforms with less effort.
Mm.
And I'd also say that if you're changing, adapting your message, there's a possibility as well that you're going to click with a new audience because it might be that they saw your post before and forgot about it,
Mm.
but
Mhm.
they're now seeing it again and they're motivated to take action on it. Or it might be that you've adapted the post in a way that it speaks to a new kind of audience, like perhaps
Mm.
you've made it more visual and dynamic so visual learners can really click with it. Or you could change the post slightly so that you're targeting like a different segment of your audience.
Okay. Can you walk us through what the process would be of turning a podcast episode into written content? Like, what would the key steps be?
Of course. So if I am repurposing content from a podcast episode, the process really looks like stripping it down and then building it back up again.
Mm.
So the first thing that I do is I get a transcript of the podcast episode. Which you can do with any number of AI tools. I use a tool called otter.ai. But actually now a lot of podcasts platforms, they'll generate a transcript for you automatically.
Mm.
So once I have that transcript, I then use another AI tool like ChatGPT or Claude AI to get a summary of the entire episode. So that's the kind of building up. That's the sort of, we're getting to like the breaking down process there. Because once I have the summary, I'll read through the whole thing
Mhm.
and think about what are the kind of 2 or 3 key points from this podcast episode that I want to share with my audience in a different way. So with those posts, I'll then go back and listen to those parts of the podcast episode specifically, because AI is really good at giving you an overview, but sometimes it misses out on nuance or on perhaps like a specific vocabulary that you use that you want to make sure that you include. And then once I have those kind of really key ideas from that podcast episode, I then build them up in a different way. So with my written content, when I'm writing it, I always ask myself, what's the hook? So what would my audience be intrigued by? What's going to reel them in, stop them scrolling, and make them engage with it? So that's the hook. And then after that, what's the lesson that I want them to learn? And then the last question is, what action do I want them to take once they've absorbed this lesson? Then the action might be that they book a call or subscribe to an email link. Creating the piece of content, the kind of key point from the podcast episode with these points in mind. So there's the key moment from the podcast episode that I want to share, and I design that piece of written content with the hook, the lesson, and then the action.
Hook, lesson, action. Got it.
Exactly.
I think that's a good way to remember it when people are repurposing content. Hook, lesson, action. So what common mistakes do you see people making when they're repurposing their content?
I would say, well, one big mistake is that you're not repurposing at all, because by not repurposing, you're kind of leaving money on the table, because you've invested money in making that content, whether it's just your time or whether you put resources into it. And by just putting it out into the world once and then kind of putting it on the virtual shelf and never touching it again, you're not squeezing the most value from it that you could. So mistake number one, not repurposing at all. After that, actually repurposing every single thing is kind of a mistake too, because, for example, there's AI tools out there that will take a 30-minute podcast episode and they'll just turn it into 30 60-second clips, and then you can just scattergun them everywhere. And if you're doing that, you're not really bearing in mind your target audience, because if they just see one of those videos, they're just going to be dropped somewhere into a conversation between two people that they don't know about, they don't know the context, and they're going to hear 60 seconds of a conversation that might not be the most interesting or relevant to them. So I would say that's why when you're repurposing, keep the purpose of that content in mind. Also, repurposing tends to involve taking content from one platform and putting it onto another. And it would be a mistake to ignore the conventions of that platform. So YouTube allows for really long form content where you can get into detail, whereas TikTok has got to be short, punchy. You give the value right away. So when you're taking content that you've originally posted on one platform and you want to put it on another, just bear in mind, how will people who regularly use this platform be able to engage with this content? And then the last mistake I would say in content repurposing is not using tools that are at your disposal. Like I've mentioned a couple of tools already, like Otter AI for transcripts, ChatGPT. These things can help you to break a piece of content down, have a summary of it. You can also use AI tools to look up online trends, like what are people searching, what do they want to know, and then that could help you go into your back catalog and think, oh, if people are searching for tax season advice now, I've got tons of content about that I can repurpose. Be using those tools that you have, and if you need other help or support, then outsource yourself. you can outsource to if you want that kind of help and expert overview.
Yeah. What about repurposing short pieces of content? Do you recommend that? Or are you focusing just on like longer form content that you then are breaking down?
That's a good question. You can repurpose all kinds of content. That's not really a limit. But if you your piece of content video, you can't necessarily maybe changing a question of, say, changing the hook. What is it that would get somebody interested in watching this video? Can I phrase that hook or that question in a different way? Or it could be, yeah, just putting it on a different platform, and then that can give you other kinds of information as well, like testing out posting at a different time of day or testing a different kind of audience. So there's other kinds of value you can get from it too.
What about how can people be repurposing content to not only engage new audiences, but also nurturing their existing clients? Like, how can you give us some examples of ways content has been used with current clients?
Yes, so you can repurpose content to speak to your existing audience as well. And I would say that is, you can use your content to help move them along your kind of sales pipeline, that maybe they know you a little bit, they've heard of you somewhere, but you can put content out there for people who've heard of you in some way to encourage them to take that next step towards reaching out to you. So an example of this might be like, maybe you have a blog post that's like, 8 signs that you're ready to work with a financial advisor. And this kind of list article content is great to repurpose, because you can do each of those points can be one post on, say, Instagram or LinkedIn. And with each one of those, you can really kind of hit a different pressure point person should contact you. So maybe you could be saying, oh, you need to contact me now because we're coming up to tax season. Or you could be saying, you need to be contacting me now if you're thinking about buying a house or, starting a family. You can kind of test out different ways and see what engages best with your target audience, and all of this without having to come up with a brand new piece of content every single.
What about time frame? Like, how long should you be waiting between that first piece of content and the repurposed? Is there a do you recommend a time?
About it. So it really depends on what your individual goals are. I think if obviously, if the content is kind of time sensitive in some way, for example, if you're promoting some kind of product that you're just about to launch, or the sales closing and you want to get people through the door quickly, then in that case you can actually share pieces of content that are, otherwise, if you're just starting with content repurposing and you don't really want to kind of get a practice with it, a good way to practice is to look on your archives, whether that's like just scrolling back up through your Instagram or your LinkedIn, or on your back end, and see what you were sharing this time last year, and just ask yourself, oh, would people find this interesting this time this year? And that way, almost nobody is going to remember that you shared this post this time last year, especially if you're doing things like changing the hook. So that's a really good way to kind of dip your toes in. And the more comfortable you feel with it, the more you can recently. I'll get bored of this, but when you think about how much information they single day on their smartphones through their email accounts, you actually have to share your individual message many times for them to really absorb oh, maybe this person is the right person for me to work with.
Sorry, just give me one moment.
That's okay.
Okay, so at Cali Collective, we emphasize efficiency and results. How can financial advisors measure the success of their repurposed content?
Well, efficiency and results are both really important. So you're definitely on the right track with that. I would say one thing to look at, although I'll caveat it a little bit, is time spent. So content repurposing is supposed to help you time. So if you're spending less time repurposing your content than you would creating something from scratch, generally that's good. But the kind of nuance I would add to that is that the other metric you need to be looking at is your reach. So repurposing your content, sharing more with your audience should theoretically increase your impressions, the number of people that see your post, engagement, the number of people that like it or comment or share it, and then conversion, the number of clients that you end up getting. So these are all really important things, and obviously conversion is the bottom line of your business. And if spending more time content repurposing has a positive impact on your impressions and engagement, then you don't have to worry about time spent. That means that you're giving the right message to the right audience at the right time. So I think you just need to have like a global look, but keep an eye on how much time you're putting into it.
Okay. If somebody wants to learn more about the service you offer, or maybe just repurposing in general, what's the best way that they can find out more about you?
I have a website, copyhop.co, and I've got a blog on there where I share different thoughts about content repurposing, as well as ideas, guides, content repurposing. On my website, I speak specifically to podcasters who want to repurpose their content, but it's also applicable to people who have other kinds of content too. And on my website, you'll find a link to join my email list. And if you join, you'll also get a series of emails from me, again, talking to podcasters about how they can repurpose their podcast episodes, and this time into an email list. So that's really helping you to take your audience from somebody who just casually listens to you to becoming your client through getting them to want to get your emails, and then sending them emails that are super relevant to them, super interesting, that are based on podcast episodes that you've already made. So my website, my emails, and I'm also quite active on LinkedIn as well.
Okay. Any last tips that you'd like to share about repurposing content?
I would say don't hold back from it. Like I said, you actually have to share an idea with your audience so many times for them to react to it and respond to it. And maybe even if you share a post that's very similar within the space of a week, you might find that it kind of lodged somewhere in somebody's head and they thought, oh, that's really interesting, I'll come back to it. And then they didn't. So don't be afraid to bore people, because you're very unlikely to. And also really think of it in terms of you're kind of showing love and respect to the content that you made in the first place. You put your heart into it first once when you want, and share it again with people.
I like that. Sorry again.
That's okay. It's cold season.
It is. And my teary eyes are not because I'm crying. It's just the cold.
It's just content repurposing is so emotional.
So emotional. Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Sarah.
That's okay. I'm so happy I could come and talk with you.
Yes. And if you're joining us today, get your marketing scorecard by scanning the QR code below. Find out what your marketing strengths are and what your next steps should be. And then join us next week as we talk to blanking because I have a cold. Blame everything on that. But we're talking about how you can define your ideal audience in better detail. And we will be talking, it'll be more of a discussion next week, less of a interview. So make sure you join us and come with any questions you have about defining your ideal client. Thanks. Have a great week.